I told my son that his father had just passed away. His response? "It's Linda's birthday. Can we talk tomorrow?" And right then, I understood something brutal. I hadn't just lost my husband, I had lost my son too. He never showed up at the funeral. No call, no message, nothing. But 3 weeks later, he received a letter from my lawyer. He opened it, and he froze like time had stopped. What I did next is something he will carry for the rest of his life, and I didn't say a single word. Before I tell you what happened, please like and subscribe if this story reaches you, and leave a comment below. What is one truth you think everyone should learn before it's too late? Richard died right there at the kitchen table in the middle of laughing about the kind of cream I bought. Again, the wrong kind apparently. He smiled, shook his head, tapped his spoon against his mug and said, "If this powdered junk kills me, maybe then you'll know what real guilt feels like." It was supposed to be a joke, just another playful jab like he always threw my way. But then his hand jerked. The spoon dropped and clattered against the table. His expression shifted, eyes wide, like breathing had suddenly become a mystery. I dropped the butter knife and rushed toward him, yelling his name, heart in my throat. But he was already gone. His body slumped forward before I could even reach the phone. Before my knees hit the floor. Before I had a chance to ask him if he was joking. But he wasn't. The 911 operator spoke in a calm, measured voice as they guided me through chest compressions. While my world cracked open like glass, I whispered his name again and again, like it might tether him back to this world. But I already knew. I knew from the way his head leaned to the side, from how cold his fingers felt when I clutched them. When the paramedics arrived, I stepped back like I wasn't even part of the moment. They used words like cardiac arrest, unrevivable, DNR, and I nodded as if I could understand anything at all. The house felt deafening and hollow all at once. I sat on the couch, staring at nothing, feeling like the air itself was too heavy to breathe. Once they covered his body, after they told me there was nothing left to do, I picked up my phone with hands that weren't steady anymore. I called. Eric, my only child. The line rang 5 times before he finally answered. I managed to say, "Eric, it's Dad. He collapsed. He's gone." There was a pause. Then he said, "Oh, Mom, today's Linda's birthday. Can we talk later?" For a second, I didn't even process it. I thought I imagined it. But then he added, "She planned this whole brunch and we've got people over." I didn't say anything. No scream, no sob, just silence. My hand lowered the phone as if guided by instinct. I hung up on my own son before I could hear one more word that would destroy what little was left of me. The air around me felt like it was pulsing. My ears buzzed like something inside was cracking. I looked over at Richard's chair, the one he used every morning. Every crossword night, the one he had died in. I sat beside him and took his hand like I could warm it back to life. Like if I loved him enough, maybe I could reverse time. Eventually, the coroner arrived. They asked if I wanted a moment alone. I said no, because the moment I needed had already vanished. I went upstairs, locked our bedroom door, and crawled into the sheets we'd slept on the night before. I didn't change a thing. Richard's phone was still on the nightstand. I picked it up with the most desperate hope in the world that maybe there was something left. A message, a memory, a goodbye. But there was nothing, just a cold screen and silence. There it was, one missed call. 10:42 p.m. last night. A single unanswered call to Eric. No voicemail, no reply. Just that blank line in the call log like a ghost trying to make contact. Richard had reached out. He tried. In whatever quiet way he could, he tried to connect with our son the night before he died. Maybe he sensed something was off. Maybe his body was already warning him, and he reached for the one person he thought would care. And Eric let it ring. I pressed the phone against my chest, and all at once I could feel the gravity of everything we'd shared. 42 years of marriage. 4 decades of holding each other up through mortgages, layoffs, sickness, raising a child, a home that echoed with memories of laughter and slammed doors and Sunday pancakes and late-night fights that ended in forgiveness. And now this. All of it being swallowed up in the silence left by a son who couldn't be bothered to answer his father's final call. That silence was louder than anything spoken at the service. It cut deeper than the condolences. The day we buried Richard felt like some warped dream where nothing made sense. I stood in that chapel, clutching the podium like it was the only thing keeping me upright, watching lips move without hearing any real sound. People I hadn't seen in a decade came up to me in line with soft eyes and whispered, "He was such a good man, and we're so sorry." And all I could think was, where the hell is my son? Not in the pews, not standing beside me, not in the hallway, not even sitting in a damn car outside. The night before the funeral, I called to confirm he was coming. Linda answered. Her voice was too cheerful for the moment. She said Eric was still trying to decide because they had booked a weekend getaway, and the cancellation fee was apparently high this close to the trip. I just stared at the phone as she kept talking, trying to explain how Linda's birthday mattered too, and how she was trying to protect her own mental space. I didn't say a word. I just ended the call. I wasn't going to plead with them to show up to Richard's funeral like it was some last-minute dinner invitation. Not after all Richard had done. Not after all the sleepless nights he spent rocking baby Eric through fevers and stomach aches. Not after building elaborate Lego kingdoms on the living room rug. Not after sitting down at the kitchen table every Saturday morning teaching him how to write a check and calculate interest like it was a survival skill. And especially not after Richard called Eric the night before he died and got nothing but silence. People noticed he wasn't there. Of course they did. The murmurs began before the ceremony even started. Where's Eric? Maybe he missed his flight. Hope Linda's okay. As if they were the ones we needed to worry about. Even Bob, one of Richard's college buddies, leaned in and whispered, "I figured your boy would be front row today." I just nodded like it didn't feel like someone was peeling the skin off my chest. But the part that cracked me wide open came after the service. I was standing by the coffee urn in the church hall, trying to remember how to hold a conversation, when Mike, one of Richard's co-workers, walked up looking hesitant. He said, "I don't mean to step on anything, but Richard mentioned something odd a few weeks ago. Said he was helping Eric out with money and seemed pretty stressed about it." I didn't even blink. I felt like the floor beneath me dropped out. Richard never told me a thing. I thought we told each other everything. That was our rule. No secrets. Apparently not anymore. I didn't ask Mike for details. I just gave him a polite smile, thanked him for coming, and made an excuse to leave. I walked straight into the ladies' room, locked the stall, sat down on the closed toilet lid, and stared at the same spot on the tile floor for I don't know how long. Someone eventually knocked and asked if I was okay. I wasn't, not even close. My son skipped his father's funeral so he could sip mimosas and eat eggs Benedict with his wife on some birthday weekend retreat. And just when I thought that was the worst of it, whispers of financial secrets started to surface, unraveling everything I thought I knew. That night when I walked back into our house, it felt like the walls were holding their breath. The air was too still, the quiet too thick. I poured myself a glass of cheap red wine and sank into the arm of the couch, staring at Richard's empty chair, like maybe, if I stared hard enough, I'd see the outline of him still there. I was trying not to fall apart, trying not to feel how hollow the house was without him. I picked up my phone just to distract myself, and that's when I saw it. A photo Linda had posted. Her, dressed like a flamingo in some bright pink thing, smiling with a champagne flute in one hand, and her other arm looped around Eric like nothing in the world was wrong. The caption read, "Best birthday ever. Love my hubby." She had posted it during Richard's funeral. While I stood there, holding back tears during the eulogy, they were clinking glasses somewhere. I stared at the screen so long my eyes went blurry and my fingers started to tremble. I felt sick. That night I barely slept. I lay in our bed and reached out in the dark out of habit, expecting to find Richard's hand where it always used to be. But all I found was cold sheets and empty space. Around 3 a.m. I got up, couldn't stay still any longer. I walked over to Richard's old desk and started digging through the drawers like a woman possessed. I didn't even know what I was looking for, but I couldn't stop. Bank statements, insurance files, paperwork we'd both filed away over the years and never looked at again. Anything that might help explain what Mike had said. Because now, it wasn't just grief clawing at me. It was suspicion, a creeping, icy feeling that maybe I didn't know the full truth about the people I loved. And the only person who could have given me answers was already in the ground. The next morning, I didn't wake up with sadness. I woke up with purpose. Not curiosity, not confusion. It was sharper than that, angrier. It was grief twisted into resolve. I went straight to the filing cabinet Richard kept locked, the one he always said I had a spare key to if I ever needed it. And I did have the key. It was taped to the back of our wedding photo in the closet. A gesture that once felt sweet now felt like some quiet test I hadn't realized I was being given. I unlocked the drawer and started going through his files. Thick stacks of neatly labeled folders. Taxes, retirement accounts, banking records, sorted, month by month, year by year, like the work of a man who always planned to live long enough to explain it all. It didn't take long to find the one that changed everything. A slim blue folder with a simple label, Eric Transfers. My heart was hammering when I sat down and opened it. Inside was a cold trail of betrayal dressed up in spreadsheets. Dozens of wire transfers from Richard's personal account to Eric. $2,000. And then one that made me go numb. $12,000 labeled urgent, Linda Medical. 15 transfers in 18 months. 15. And I had known about none of them. Richard never mentioned a word. I will cut you off completely. I love you, but I won't let you take advantage of your mother's trust. Those words were written in the handwriting I'd recognize anywhere. Bold, slightly slanted, with that sharp hook in the R that Richard never could smooth out. There was no signature, but it didn't need one. It was dated, exactly 2 weeks before he died. I sat there at his desk, holding that letter like it was radioactive, the paper trembling between my fingers as my chest tightened with something I couldn't quite name. Rage? Heartbreak? Both, maybe. I kept hearing Eric's voice in my head. How flat and detached he'd sounded when I told him his father was gone. Not shocked, not shaken, just inconvenienced. Like I'd interrupted his errands. Like I was asking him to push back a dentist appointment instead of telling him his father had died. I couldn't cry, couldn't even breathe properly. I just sat there stunned, realizing that Richard had spent the final stretch of his life quietly fighting a war I didn't even know was happening, trying to hold our son accountable while sparing me the weight of it. And Eric, our only child, the same boy Richard had rocked through sleepless nights and taught how to tie a necktie, had looked us both in the eye while accepting thousands upon thousands of dollars under the guise of some crisis we weren't even told about. I placed the folder back in its drawer, locked it with hands that still weren't steady, and returned the key to its hiding place behind our wedding photo. Not out of reverence, but because I needed time. Time to think about, more than just the money or the betrayal. I needed to face the question I'd been avoiding since the moment I picked up that letter. Who exactly had my son become, and did I have the courage to do what Richard hadn't? I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where Richard had collapsed just 5 days ago, and stared at the coffee mug he'd been drinking from, still sitting in the sink, unwashed. That morning kept replaying in my mind, frame by frame. I didn't have a plan yet, not really. But I knew one thing with more certainty than I'd ever known anything. I was finished pretending everything was fine, and that resolve had barely settled in when he showed up. 5 days too late, like his grief had a grace period, and now that he'd cleared his schedule, he could check this off his list. He didn't call ahead, just showed up that Wednesday afternoon like he expected the door to be open. And when I saw Eric standing there, hands shoved into his jacket pockets, posture stiff and nervous, I didn't feel relief. I felt calculation. Like he'd come because someone told him he had to, not because he wanted to. Linda was in the car, parked at the curb with the engine still running, staring down at her phone like she was just waiting for the signal to drive away. That alone told me everything I needed to know before Eric said a word. "Mom," he said, and I just stepped aside. Didn't hug him, didn't speak. I led him into the living room where Richard's chair sat exactly as he'd left it, the cushion still holding his shape like a ghost refusing to be smoothed out. Eric didn't even look at it. I offered him coffee, mostly out of muscle memory, and he declined, perching at the edge of the couch like a man waiting for his next appointment. And then finally, in this voice that tried too hard to sound thoughtful, he said, "Linda thinks I should have come sooner, and she's probably right." I almost laughed right there in the middle of my living room. Of course she did. Of course it took her to make him show up. Not guilt, not grief, not love. Just Linda giving him the green light to do damage control, like this whole thing was a bad press day, and I was the client. I nodded slowly, not saying a word, and sat down across from him. What he didn't know was that my phone was already recording, hidden in the pocket of my cardigan. Not because I wanted revenge, at least not yet, but because I didn't trust myself to hold all his lies in my head. I needed proof of the gaslight I knew was coming, of every dodge, every justification, especially now. Especially after what I'd found in that blue folder tucked away behind locked metal and a smile I no longer believed. "Did you know your father tried to call you the night before he died?" I asked, keeping my eyes locked on Eric's face, waiting for the reaction. And there it was, a small but telling twitch in his jaw, followed by the kind of shrug people give when they're trying to deflect before the truth lands. He looked away, then said, "I had my phone on silent. We were out at dinner. Linda had planned this surprise thing." And even as the words came out of his mouth, I could see him hearing how hollow they sounded. He paused, caught halfway between excuse and guilt, but I didn't say anything. I let the silence stretch until it became heavy enough that he started scrambling to fill it. I meant to call him back. I did. I just didn't know it was anything serious. He never told me he wasn't feeling well. Neither did you. That last line hit like a slap, but I didn't let it show. I kept my face still because I knew that was what he wanted, to shift the weight, to pass off the blame like grief could be shared out in equal pieces, and his part somehow didn't come with consequences. He wasn't sick, Eric. He had a heart attack, right at the breakfast table, 5 minutes after joking about the coffee. "Creamer," I said flatly, and watched as he rubbed his forehead like he was the one being punished, like this conversation was something being done to him. And then I leaned forward and didn't soften my voice one bit. "I found the transfers." That was all it took. His body went stiff, like a wire pulled tight, and his mouth opened before he had time to think. "What transfers?" he asked too fast, too loud, and I didn't bother cushioning the blow. "The ones from Dad's account to yours, all of them. The payments for Linda's medical expenses, the gaps in your rent, the trips you two took that magically lined up with the bank statements." "Don't lie to me, Eric, not now." He had the nerve to act hurt, like I was the one crossing a line. "Those were loans, Mom. We were having a tough time. Dad offered to help." And that's when I pulled it out, the folded yellow legal pad note, the one Richard wrote by hand, the one he never got the chance to send. I passed it to Eric without a word, and he read it quietly. I watched his eyes move across the page, line by line, watched him fold it back like it was some old grocery list instead of a confession from the man who raised him. Then he said, he didn't mean that. Just like that. Like it was a suggestion, not a boundary. That was the moment I realized I wasn't sitting across from my son anymore. Not the boy who used to fall asleep on Richard's chest during Sunday night football. Not the kid who spent an entire summer helping build that shed in the backyard, measuring and sawing beside his dad like it was the most important project in the world. No, this was someone else. Someone who had trained himself to justify betrayal if it kept him comfortable. Someone who had made the same selfish choice over and over again, and now he was only here because Linda had told him to be. Not because he wanted to face what he'd done, but because she told him to clean up the optics. I stood up, walked slowly to the front door and opened it. "I'll let you know if I need anything from you," I said, and he looked like he might try to say something else, something that would patch the cracks or spin this into something softer. But then I heard Linda honk from the driveway, and just like that, he gave a little nod and left. He walked out without a hug, without even asking how I was doing, like checking in on his mother was optional now. I stood there watching as he climbed into the passenger seat, and there she was, Linda, sitting behind the wheel with that smug little smile she probably didn't even know she was wearing, like she thought the conversation inside had somehow ended in her favor. She glanced toward the house one last time, like she was sealing something shut in her mind, and I thought to myself, you have no idea what's coming. The next morning I woke up with this eerie kind of stillness, the kind of quiet that doesn't come from peace but from clarity, like my body already knew the decision had been made, and all that was left was to follow through. I didn't even pour myself a cup of coffee before calling Raymond Keller, our family attorney for over 30 years, the one who used to send us Christmas cards and always remembered to ask about Richard's health. When I told him I needed to revise my will immediately, he didn't press for details. He simply said, "Come in tomorrow morning, I'll clear my schedule." I spent the rest of the day gathering every piece of documentation I had. Printed bank, statements, that slim blue folder with the transfers, Richard's unsent letter to Eric, the audio file of Eric's visit, his hesitant half-lies recorded in my pocket. And then I added something else, something that mattered more to me than all of it. A handwritten letter to Olivia, our granddaughter, sealed in an envelope marked for her 18th birthday. Because no matter how messy the rest of this family turned out to be, that little girl deserved the truth. Not Linda's filtered version, not Eric's polished silence. She deserved the real story of who her grandfather was and what her father had chosen to become. When I walked into Raymond's office the next day, he took one look at my face and said, "This isn't just about revising assets, is it?" I nodded and handed him everything I'd brought. "I want it all placed into a trust," I said. "The accounts, the house, Richard's investments, everything we've built. But not a single cent to Eric, not a dollar to Linda, nothing." Raymond didn't blink. He just flipped open his yellow legal pad and started jotting notes. We structured the trust to pass everything to Olivia, but not all at once. She'd inherit it in full at 25, with early access only allowed for college expenses, housing, and health. Nothing flashy. No new sports car on her sweet 16. No guilt money disguised as love. And I made sure to include a protection clause. If Eric or Linda ever contested the will, in any way, Olivia would receive full control immediately, and they would lose all remaining rights, including visitation, while the trust was active. I knew how harsh it sounded, but when a son chooses brunch over burying his father, and a daughter-in-law chooses manipulation over mourning, you stop thinking about keeping the peace and start thinking about protecting what little you still have left of the man you lost. Raymond read everything twice, tightened the language, added a section for the sealed letter to Olivia, and included a transcript of Eric's visit, documenting the financial deceit, the emotional vacancy, and the way he twisted love into leverage. When it was done, he looked up and said, "This is airtight, Marianne. No gray areas, but you realize it's going to hit him where it hurts." And I met his eyes and said, "That's the point, Raymond. It's meant to." Within the hour it was signed and notarized and locked in his files. And when I stepped out of that office, I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady. I had drawn a line Richard never could. Not to punish, but to finally protect what mattered. And it wasn't revenge. It was restoration. This was no longer a theory or a warning. It was reality. If Eric truly believed he could treat his parents like bottomless ATMs, expecting withdrawals with no limits and no consequences, then he was about to learn just how closely that so-called machine had been watching, documenting, waiting. And when the moment came, it severed the cord with the precision of a scalpel. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of wine, the house quiet around me, and reread the letter I'd written to Olivia. 6 full pages in my own handwriting, not filled with bitterness, but with clarity. Truth laid bare, line by line. I told her who her grandfather really was, not just the man she barely remembered, but the man who spent his life showing up for everyone, including her father. I told her what Richard had done out of love, and how that love had been manipulated, reshaped into a tool her father used to excuse choices he never should have made. I told her the inheritance she'd one day receive was not some golden reward. It was a responsibility, a reminder to choose integrity over ease, devotion over image, and strength over silence. Because in this family, she was the only one left who still had a real chance to break the cycle and build something honest. When I sealed that envelope, something shifted. It didn't feel like grief. It felt like the end of silence, the kind of silence that seeps in over years of small betrayals disguised as misunderstandings. The kind you live with so long that one day you're standing beside a casket alone and only then realize how completely you've been abandoned. But now, finally, I'd ensured that silence would stop with me. 4 days after my visit to Raymond's office, the letter landed in Eric's mailbox. Certified mail, delivery confirmation, time-stamped in my inbox at exactly 11:13 a.m. I pictured him standing in his kitchen, thumbing through envelopes without a care, his coffee probably still warm, until his eyes landed on that law firm logo, stamped in the upper corner. And I knew the moment he opened it. Not because he called or texted or emailed. He didn't. Not that day. Not the next. But Linda did. Of course she did. And not with an apology, not even with reason. Just a flurry of texts that pinged one after another on my phone like digital spit. Wow. Classy, Marianne. Followed by, "You're unbelievable." And then, "Do you even care what this is doing to Olivia?" I didn't answer, not a word, because that silence was the most honest thing I could offer them now. On the 3rd day, the phone rang again, and this time it was Eric, calling from a blocked number, as if hiding behind it might shield him from the truth. His voice was low, cautious, almost hesitant, like he was trying to slip back into the version of himself he used to be, back when he was 6 and scared to admit he'd broken the porch light. He started with, "Mom, I just got the letter," like I didn't already know, like I hadn't been living inside the echo of that silence for 3 days straight. I didn't say a thing. I let the quiet stretch between us like a canyon. And when he finally asked, "Is this real?" I answered, "You tell me." Because there was nothing left to explain, nothing left to soften. The pause that followed felt like the longest 10 seconds of my life, suspended between the boy I raised and the man who'd let me carry this loss alone. Then he said, "I didn't know Dad felt that way." And I snapped, not with rage, not with yelling, but with a sudden bitter chill that cut straight through my throat. "You didn't know because you never asked, Eric. You were too busy pretending we were optional." That was the moment Linda cut in on the other line, her voice clipped and furious, like she'd been waiting to pounce. "You can't actually disinherit your own son. That's insane." And I almost laughed, not because any of it was funny, but because her timing, her outrage, her complete inability to understand the weight of what they'd done. It was all so predictable, it could have been scripted. Funny how fast the mask slipped once the money stopped flowing. I looked at Linda, her voice dripping with disbelief, and said, "I didn't disinherit him. I protected Olivia." She let out a scoff, sharp and arrogant, and said, "From us?" Like the very idea of her being a threat to anyone, let alone her own daughter, was laughable. I stared at the phone in my hand and said, From this conversation, from this entitlement." Before she could unleash whatever bite she had lined up next, I hung up. That was the line. That was the boundary Richard had never drawn, but should have. You don't get to vanish when grief comes knocking and then reappear when there's something to inherit. You don't get to walk away from the funeral and expect to rewrite the will. You don't get to ignore the final chapter and still demand to be written into the next one. Afterward, I sat at the same kitchen table where Richard's heart gave out. The same chair I hadn't moved since that morning, staring into the stillness that followed like it finally belonged to me. It wasn't peace, it wasn't closure, but it was control. And for the first time since we lowered his casket into the ground, I felt like I had reclaimed something. That evening, one last message buzzed on my phone. It was Eric. No apology, no answers. Just a single line that read, "I don't know how we come back from this." I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because it wasn't mine to give anymore. That would be Olivia's decision. When she was old enough to see clearly, to weigh love against truth, to understand what really happened, she'd decide who belonged in her future. That would be the legacy Richard and I left her. Not money, not property, but a foundation built on choice and honesty. Then came Sunday. No heads up, no phone call, no warning. They pulled into the driveway like nothing had changed. Linda climbed out first, heels clicking too loud for the pavement, walking like she was about to win a courtroom standoff. Eric followed behind her a few paces back, like he wasn't sure if he was supposed to support her or restrain her. I opened the front door, and before I could say a word, she launched into it. "No. Hello. No. Can we talk?" Just straight to the accusation. "You're manipulating this family with legal intimidation," she snapped, voice sharp, too polished, like she'd practiced in front of the bathroom mirror. I stayed in the doorway, unmoved. I didn't invite them in. I didn't budge. I just stood there, letting the words echo in the space between us. Then she added, "You're punishing us for setting boundaries." And that's when it hit me. The way she tilted her head, the smugness in her eyes, she actually believed it. After all of it, she still thought she wore the moral crown. After skipping Richard's funeral. After quietly siphoning money behind my back through Eric. After twisting everything upside down and now daring to play the victim. I didn't say a word. I simply stepped aside, just enough for them to enter, not because they deserved it, but because I knew Olivia was upstairs, lingering in the hallway like kids always do, catching pieces of conversations they're never meant to hear, and something deep in my chest told me she needed to witness this, not to frighten her, but to arm her with truth. Linda waltzed into the living room like she owned it, perfume thick in the air, words thicker. Eric sank into the couch, eyes glued to the floor, saying nothing, while Linda took center stage like she always did. "We've spoken to an attorney," she announced, arms crossed, chin up. "And if this will doesn't get changed, we might have legal grounds to contest it." My voice stayed calm, almost too calm. "Are you saying you're planning to have me declared mentally incompetent?" I asked. Linda shrugged with faux innocence and said, "I'm just saying it's not impossible. Grief does strange things to people." That's when I saw it. Eric flinching just barely, but enough to tell me even he knew she'd gone too far. Whether it was guilt eating at him or just plain shame, I couldn't tell. But I saw the hesitation in Eric's eyes, and I heard it too. The faint creak of the hallway floor above us. Olivia, shifting her weight, listening from the shadows just out of sight, like kids do when they know the truth is hiding in the grown-up voices downstairs. I knew every single word was being absorbed by the only person left in this family who still had the chance to see the truth for what it was, unfiltered. I turned to Eric, looked him dead in the eyes and asked, "Do you agree with her?" He didn't answer. His jaw clenched and he looked away, swallowing hard like the truth had gotten stuck in his throat. And in that silence, I got my answer. He wouldn't protect me. He wouldn't honor his father. He wouldn't challenge Linda even now, even with everything laid bare. That silence told me more than anything Linda had screamed. It told me he had made his choice. And Linda, as always, took that silence and ran with it. She stepped in like a storm gust, her voice rising with self-righteousness as she said, "You're tearing this family apart over money." And I let out a single low laugh. Not bitter, not loud, just the kind of sound you make when something is so twisted it's gone full circle and come back around to tragic. I said, "I'm the one tearing it apart? Richard died at our kitchen table alone. His son couldn't even bother to come to the funeral. And you're standing here talking about money like that's what's broken us?" And that's when I saw her. Olivia. She'd stepped into view on the stairs halfway down, her small hand on the banister, wide eyes fixed on the scene below. She didn't say a word, just looked at Linda, then Eric, then me. And then slowly, she turned and walked back upstairs, her footsteps soft but deliberate. The silence she left behind hit harder than any argument. It settled over the room like a storm cloud hanging by a thread. Linda noticed it too. Her voice wavered for the first time, just a little, and she said, "She doesn't understand." And I looked her in the eye and said, "She understands more than you think." Then I stepped toward the front door, opened it wide and said, "We're done here." Eric stood up without a word. He didn't defend her, didn't plead his case. He just walked past me and out into the driveway. Linda stood frozen for half a second, like she was considering one last dig, one final jab, but instead she followed, her heels clicking on the tile like punctuation marks, and I shut the door before the last one landed on the porch. 3 weeks passed before I heard anything again, and then it arrived, an envelope, unmarked except for my name written in Olivia's neat, careful handwriting, the way only a 12-year-old can write when they're trying to make something look important. Inside was a small black flash drive. No note, no explanation, just that. My stomach dropped before I even opened it because I knew somehow this wasn't a drawing or a funny video or anything a child should be mailing on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. This was something else, something heavy. I slid it into my laptop, and the screen came to life with folders, each named by date, each containing files that made my breath catch. Audio recordings, screenshots of texts, and video clips, most of them shaky and dim, filmed from behind her bedroom door. But they were clear enough to hear everything Linda and Eric had said behind those walls, thinking no one could hear them. One recording had Linda's voice rising in fury, saying, "She's using that will to manipulate everyone, and if Olivia takes her side, I swear to God, Eric, I'll pull her out of school and homeschool her until she falls in line." Another recording followed, and it was somehow worse. Eric's voice was quieter, resigned, and he said, "Just let Mom think she's in charge for now. Let her run her little game. It's not like we were counting on the money right now anyway, and if Olivia plays nice, she can still help us later." That's what I heard. My own son, the boy I once rocked to sleep, talking about my estate like it was a chessboard, and I was just some tired piece waiting to be cleared off. I sat there frozen, listening to him discuss my life's work, my legacy like it was a waiting game, like I was already gone. But the part that truly shattered something in me came in a video file labeled Kitchen Night. It showed Linda standing at the sink, back turned to the camera, whispering into her phone like the villain in a bad soap opera. She said, "If we push just a little harder, she'll crack. We'll say she's confused. Maybe get the lawyer to question her. State of mind, and then boom, the trust gets flagged." I heard Olivia's breath catch right before the video cut off. And I don't know what pierced me deeper, Linda's calculated cruelty, or the quiet horror that my granddaughter had been secretly protecting me, while I thought I was the one shielding her. At the bottom of those folders, buried beneath all the videos and audio files, was a simple text document, just a few lines. But it hit me harder than anything I'd read since Richard's last letter. It said, "Grandma, I didn't know who else to tell. I hear things when they think I'm asleep. I know they're lying. I believe you. I'm saving this in case you ever need help." I stared at those words for a long time, longer than anything else in that drive, and in that moment, everything became painfully, beautifully clear. The legacy I thought I was leaving behind wasn't just about property, trust funds, or legal vengeance. It was about her, about Olivia, standing alone in a house where truth was treated like poison, collecting evidence not for drama, but for survival. I backed up the drive twice, one copy for Alan, one copy locked in my fireproof safe. Then I sat down and wrote a new letter to Olivia, sealed and dated with instructions to open it only if something ever happened to me before she turned 18. I needed her to know that I didn't just believe her, I trusted her. I needed her to know that if she ever had to sit across from a school counselor, a judge, or anyone who doubted her, she would have the proof she needed to hold her ground and say, "I saw it, I heard it, I lived through it." That night I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just sat in Richard's favorite chair, holding that tiny flash drive in my palm like it was part grenade, part lifeline, and made a vow, not just to protect Olivia's inheritance, but to protect her truth. Because in this family, she was the first one brave enough to speak it out loud. The mediation was scheduled 3 weeks later in one of those sterile downtown offices that tries too hard to feel warm, with beige walls, forgettable artwork, and bottled water placed on glass tables like it could make the room feel civil. It didn't. When Eric and Linda walked in, Linda looked like she'd dressed for a courtroom scene on TV, tailored, dramatic, confident to the point of smug. Eric looked worn, 10 years older than the last time I saw him, with dark circles under his eyes and a jaw set too tight. I didn't rise to greet them. I didn't smile. I sat beside Alan, my attorney, calm and still, with the folder laid out in front of me like a silent barricade. Inside were the documents that mattered: copies of the flash drive, the bank transfer trail, Richard's unsent letter, the transcript of Eric's last visit. All of it stacked neatly, a wall of facts built to outlast their spin. The mediator, a woman with soft eyes and the kind of voice designed to de-escalate disaster, welcomed us with forced warmth and asked why we were all there. Before I could open my mouth, Linda launched into her performance. She painted herself as the misunderstood daughter-in-law, claimed I was grief-stricken to the point of irrationality, said my decisions had been clouded by loss, and hinted at the possibility of cognitive decline. I sat there and watched her perform like she was auditioning for sympathy, every word rehearsed, every pause calculated, as if victimhood were a role she'd been dying to play all along. While Eric sat beside her, looking hollowed out, shoulders sagging, his face pale and tight, and his eyes darting every time mine found his, like he couldn't bear the weight of my gaze. And when the mediator finally turned to me, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shake. I didn't flinch. I simply slid the folder across the polished table and said, "This is why." Then I sat back and watched as she opened it, one page at a time, flipping through bank statements with Richard's account number circled in red, scanned copies of wire transfers marked by date, handwritten notes Richard had never sent, the transcript of Eric's visit, and finally, clipped to the last document, a small USB drive labeled in plain block letters, evidence. Olivia's flash drive. The air shifted then. I felt it, like pressure releasing from a sealed room. The moment the illusion Linda had so carefully constructed began to fracture. The mediator stopped flipping and looked up, her expression more alert now, no longer just polite neutrality. She asked Linda directly, "Were you aware that your daughter recorded conversations in which efforts were made to influence a legal trust using psychological pressure and misinformation?" And that was when the color drained from Linda's face. She opened her mouth, fumbled, and finally blurted out, "She's 12. She doesn't understand context." But the truth was already loose in the room, no longer deniable, no longer something she could spin with sharp words and charm. The recordings existed. The documentation was airtight. The lies were exposed, and nothing she said could unmake what had already been shown. The mediator turned to Eric, giving him the chance to respond, to say anything that might reclaim even a sliver of dignity. But he just sat there rubbing his hands together like he could scrub off the guilt, like he could erase the damage if he didn't look directly at it. I looked at him and said, "She tried to warn you." And that's when Linda finally cracked, not into an apology, not into reflection, but into rage. She slammed her palm down on the table, loud enough to startle the mediator, and shouted, "This is all because you couldn't handle your husband dying. You're punishing us because you're bitter and alone." The mediator, still calm but firm, asked her to step outside and collect herself. Linda shot up from her chair, heels clacking hard against the hallway tile as she stormed out, leaving Eric alone at the table. And for the first time since we buried Richard, my son looked me in the eyes and spoke like the man I used to hope he'd become. His voice was small, barely above a whisper. I didn't know it had gotten that bad. I didn't soften. I didn't reach out. I just told him, "You didn't want to know." He looked down and nodded like the truth had finally broken through whatever spell Linda had him under. "I just wanted peace," he muttered, and I answered, "You don't find peace in silence. You find it when you choose to stand up while it still matters." When the mediator returned, she laid it all out clearly. There were no legal grounds to dispute the trust. It was solid in every way, legally drafted, ethically justified, and supported by overwhelming evidence. Olivia's recordings, she explained, were credible and revealed a consistent pattern of undue influence within the household. Linda never came back to the room, not to defend herself, not even to hear the result. Eric left soon after, not saying goodbye, not offering a handshake, not looking back. And I stayed for just a few more minutes, alone, gathering my things, staring at the empty chairs across from me. What I felt wasn't victory. It wasn't even relief. It was a quiet, steady kind of sorrow. The kind that settles deep in your bones when you realize the war is over. Not because you crushed your enemies, but because the truth finally stood up tall enough that no one could pretend anymore. Olivia turned 18 last Friday, and the day didn't come with balloons or a party or anything loud. Just a soft knock at my front door a little after noon. She stepped inside with those wide, thoughtful eyes of hers, the ones that always seemed to see more than she let on, and handed me the letter I'd written to her 5 years ago. It was still sealed, the envelope slightly yellowed at the corners, and she said, "I wanted to read it with you." I didn't say anything at first, just gave a small nod and sat down beside her as she carefully peeled it open like it might fall apart if she breathed too hard. She unfolded the 6 pages I had poured my whole heart into, back when the world felt like it was crumbling beneath my feet, and truth was the only thing I had left to give her. I watched in silence as she read, her expression moving from quiet concentration to tears, soft and steady, and she only paused once to ask, "Is all of this still true?" And I said, "Every word." She leaned into me and hugged me tighter than she ever had before, burying her face in my shoulder and whispering, "Thank you for telling me the truth when no one else would." In that moment, I felt every ounce of sorrow and strength, every choice that had led us here, all wrapped up in her arms. Later, we sat curled up together in Richard's old chair, and she took out her phone. "I want to show you something," she said. It was a video, short but clear. Olivia standing before a judge, calm and confident, her voice unwavering as she said, "I'd like to change my middle name to Coraline, after my grandmother." I couldn't hold back then. The tears came fast, catching me off guard, because hearing her say my name like that, with purpose and pride, was like watching her reclaim a piece of herself no one else had the right to shape. She was choosing a part of her family that had never betrayed her, never manipulated her, never used her as leverage. That afternoon, we drove to her high school graduation. The gym was packed, the air thick with anticipation and the sound of proud parents. When she walked across the stage and they announced her full name, Olivia Coraline Whitfield, she looked right at me and smiled. And in that look was something deeper than joy. It was clarity. The same look Richard used to have when he made a hard call no one else understood until years later. Eric was there too. I saw him near the back, sitting alone, his suit rumpled, his hands clapping more out of duty than emotion. His eyes were red, his face drawn. He didn't approach me. Didn't approach Olivia either, not because he wasn't allowed, but because for the first time, I think he understood what it really meant to be cut off in a way that had nothing to do with money. After the ceremony, Olivia came running to me first, wrapped her arms around me, and whispered in my ear. "My roommate backed out for next semester. I was wondering if you'd want to live with me." I laughed through tears, nodding before I even answered, already picturing her toothbrush in my bathroom again, the sound of her music drifting through the hall, late-night chats in the kitchen over tea. Another year of her stories, another year of her light. A quiet, defiant win against everything Linda ever tried to orchestrate. We never spoke her name that day, not even once. By then, she had faded into the backdrop like a subplot that had run out of steam, a character the story no longer needed. Her silence said more than any apology she never gave. That night when I tucked Olivia into her old bed, I left the door cracked open just like I used to when she was small, the hallway light spilling in like memory. And as she pulled the covers up, she looked at me and said, "You gave me a life I didn't even know I needed." I kissed her forehead and replied, "You chose it, sweetheart. I just made sure the path stayed clear." Then I walked back down the hallway past the photos on the wall, my hand reaching out to brush the edge of Richard's frame. I stopped for a second, touched the glass, and whispered, "She's going to be okay, love. We're going to be okay." And for the first time in longer than I can remember, I actually believed it.